Extended intelligence. How are we to look at the competition between robots, between automation and AI, and human beings? There have been a number of studies over the years exploring the potential job loss at the hands of automation and AI. This particular study, undertaken by two scholars from the university, then at the University of Oxford, Carl Benedict Fry and Michael Osborne, goes through a list of some 700 different professions and uses AI itself to try and predict which professions are at risk. Now, on the face of it, architecture doesn't do too badly. Let's look at those that are most protected. Recreational therapists, for some reason, seem to be well looked after. Choreographers, equally. Indeed, the whole domain of what we might say is kind of the creative arts would seem to be fairly safe. Here we find architecture, architects, except landscape and naval, architects down at number 82, architectural and engineering managers at 78, and so on. Several within the civil engineers, within the kind of the world of architecture and construction and engineering, seem to be relatively well placed in terms of the overall picture. When we go down to the other end, of course, we find ourselves in a situation whereby telemarketeers, they've already disappeared. Everything is now automated. When you get those automated spam calls, they are the replacement of telemarketeers. Hand sewers don't exist anymore. And there have been other surveys. This one, again, comes up with the view that somehow if you are a sewer, you've got no chance. Whereas supposedly, if you're an editor, you stand a very good chance. I've since seen some AI produced journalism where I would question whether the editor is that necessary anymore. But I would question the premise of these particular studies. The real problem is they look at a one-for-one competition between architects and AI or automation. Now, this is not what the office of the future is going to look like. It's not going to be you surrounded by humanoid robots. If anything, it's going to be AI is going to be invisible. We won't see it. And the point being that it's not a question of competition. It's not a question of AI versus human intelligence. It's a question of extended intelligence or intelligence augmentation, whereby we look at the possibility of a device that is connected through the cloud to GPUs and computational power elsewhere, enhancing the ability of the individual, extending the intelligence of the architect. In other words, it's really a question of not AI versus humans so much as AI and humans and the possibility of AI having a huge impact through the logic of extended intelligence. The logic behind this was first initiated through these two scholars, Andy Clark, a cognitive scientist now at the University of Brighton, and David Chalmers, a philosopher now in New York, and they wrote back in the 1990s an essay called The Extended Mind, whereby they pointed out that this device, the cell phone, has become, in effect, an extended mind. We now store our telephone numbers on our cell phone. We don't memorize them. It therefore is, we outsource, as it were, many of the activities that we used to use the mind for, to the point that these devices have become extensions of our minds, props in some way. And David Chalmers, in the article, gives the analogy, a kind of thought experiment of two people going to meet up at a museum. One uses their, presumably, memory to get there. Another one has a record of notes where he follows those notes, and that allows this person to get to the museum. The notes become, in a sense, a prosthesis, an extension of the capacity of the human being, of the human mind. As such, we can talk about cyborgs, how human beings have been have their capacities extended, amplified through technology. And I'm not referring to the kind of the images that we get from popular culture to $6 Million Man or to any other the movies in which these kind of strange hybrid mechanical robot kind of humans have taken place. No, I'm referring to the very simple notion of the cyborg as anybody who even has a walking stick. The walking stick becomes an extension of the body schema. The blind person feels the road through the stick, and so on. And if we had to look at the kind of discourse of the cyborg, we could possibly start with the term. It was actually invented for outer space in the 1960s, but Donna Haraway popularized it, and when she started talking about cyborgs and talking about how we are all cyborgs. Then Andy Clark, probably the most important book, Natural Born Cyborgs. And I should say Andy Clark is upset by the cover of this because he's not talking about these hybrid entities of this kind of mechanical device. It's everything that we do, from using a pair of glasses to writing with a pen to using a walking stick, that makes us cyborgs. It hasn't got to be high tech at all. It's simply an extension of the body schema. Now, after that, Catherine Hales came along and said, okay, but yeah, hold on a second. We're now in a post-human era where we're no longer talking about the human. We're talking about some kind of extension of the human. And she tries to revise Andy Clark's way of thinking. But Andy Clark comes back and said, no, it's precisely because we're human. It's not because we're post-human. We are human. And one of the important capacities of being human is the plastic brain. The idea that the brain is malleable, that we can absorb these technologies, we can start to think through these technologies. We think through the car and we drive the car. They become part of who we are and how we operate. Human beings, from this point of view, are natural born cyborgs. So what happens in the architectural office when we have these cyborgs? What happens in this world where we're all cyborgs? What is the situation where we are fundamentally cyborgs? And this, of course, is the point that Elon Musk is saying as well. All of us already are cyborgs. You have a machine extension of yourself in the form of your phone and your computer and all your applications. You are already superhuman. We have these superhuman architects, the augmented architects. Now, what happens? Well, if we redefine that opposition between human intelligence and architecture and artificial intelligence as not an opposition, but rather the possibility of AI being an extension of the human intelligence, being an extended intelligence, being augmentation of human intelligence, producing this kind of superhuman, what that means then is something very fundamental to the workings of an architectural office. Because if you have someone or a group of individuals who are empowered in this way, that have all these capacities as a result of these devices that have been part of the extended mind to the point they become cyborgs, they become superhuman, then you don't need so many people working in the office. Tom Main, in the Pritzker Prize-winning founder and design director of Morphosis, the progressive architectural practice in Los Angeles, once told me, he said, well, I wouldn't mind that too much. At the moment, I think he has 80 people in his office. He said, if I just had 12 people, that would be great. I would get to know them all much better, and rather than 80 people I don't really know, I would have 12 people I could rely on and really get to know and understand. Fine. But what does that mean for the other 68 architects, architectural students, architectural assistants, and so on, who are working in the office? Obviously, they lose their jobs.